This is the story of how one man, driven by ambition, vision, and an almost ruthless understanding of power, lifted an entire family from modest beginnings to the absolute peak of American society in just one generation. A rise so dramatic that it reshaped politics, culture, media, and the very idea of what an American dynasty could be. And that man was Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., the architect behind the Kennedy name that would later dominate headlines, history books, and the global imagination. Because before the glamour of Camelot, before the speeches, the assassinations, the myths, and the legends, there was a calculated plan forged by a father who believed that wealth was only useful if it bought influence, and influence was only meaningful if it delivered power. Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. was born into an Irish Catholic family at a time when Irish Catholics were still treated as outsiders in elite American circles, when Boston's Brahmin class shut its doors tightly, when old money looked down on new ambition, and when prejudice was not hidden but institutionalized. Yet Kennedy understood something fundamental about America that many of his contemporaries did not, that this was a country where barriers could be broken not by asking permission, but by forcing entry through success, visibility, and sheer will. He began by mastering money because he knew money was the first language of power, moving aggressively into banking, real estate, Hollywood, and the stock market, building a fortune through bold investments and sharp instincts, sometimes skating close to ethical gray areas, sometimes exploiting loopholes that others were too timid to touch, but always staying several steps ahead. And by the time the Great Depression reshapes the American economy, Joseph Kennedy was not ruined like so many others, but positioned to influence the very systems that governed finance, eventually becoming the first chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, a masterstroke that transformed a once suspected speculator into a legitimate national authority, proving that in America, reinvention was not just possible, but powerful. But Joseph Kennedy's genius was not limited to money alone, because he understood that wealth without social acceptance was fragile, so he pursued prestige with the same intensity he pursued profit, marrying Rose Fitzgerald, the daughter of Boston Mayor John F. Fitzgerald, linking his rising fortune to political lineage, blending money with politics, and planting the seeds of something much larger than personal success. Because from the very beginning, Joseph Kennedy was not building an empire for himself, he was building it for his children. He raised his sons and daughters with a singular message repeated endlessly in subtle and direct ways, that they were destined for greatness, that failure was not an option, that public service was not just noble but expected, and that the Kennedy name would one day command respect in the highest rooms of power, a belief system reinforced through elite education, constant exposure to influential figures, and relentless pressure to excel. And while this environment produced confidence, charisma, and ambition, it also produced intense competition, emotional strain, and a lifelong burden of expectation that would shape the family's triumphs and tragedies alike. Joseph Kennedy placed his eldest son, Joe Jr., on a direct path to the presidency, grooming him as the political heir, investing resources, connections, and hope into that single outcome. And when Joe Jr. was killed during World War II, the plan did not die, it simply transferred, with devastating emotional force, onto John F. Kennedy, a younger son once considered too sickly and fragile for leadership, who would instead become the vessel for his father's unfulfilled dream, propelled forward by family loyalty, financial backing, and a political machine carefully assembled behind the scenes. By the time John F. Kennedy ran for president, the family had already conquered society pages, diplomatic circles, Hollywood connections, and congressional influence, transforming the Kennedy name into a symbol of modern American royalty, youthful optimism, intellectual glamour, and national destiny. And when JFK won the presidency, Joseph Kennedy's vision was fully realized, not just in the victory itself, but in the way it redefined American leadership. Because the White House became a cultural stage, the presidency became aspirational, and politics merged with image in a way that still defines modern campaigns. Yet this rise was never simple, never clean, and never free from controversy, because Joseph Kennedy's methods, alliances, and moral compromises have long been debated, criticized, and re-examined, from his isolationist views before World War II to allegations of ruthless business tactics and even his personal life, which stood in stark contrast to the family's carefully managed public image. But what cannot be denied is the effectiveness of his strategy, because within one generation, a family that once faced social exclusion stood at the absolute center of American power, influencing domestic policy, foreign affairs, civil rights, and global perception. The Kennedy story is not just about politics, it is about branding before branding had a name, about narrative control before media strategy became an industry, about understanding that in America, perception can be as powerful as reality, and Joseph Kennedy understood this intuitively, shaping press relations, managing scandals, amplifying successes, and shielding vulnerabilities, all while pushing his children forward relentlessly, even when the cost was high. The tragedies that followed, the assassinations, accidents, and personal struggles only deepened the myth, transforming the Kennedys into a family forever suspended between greatness and grief, admired and scrutinized, envied and pitied. And through it all, the foundational truth remains that none of it would have happened without Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., the man who saw America not as it was, but as it could be bent to his will, who believed that status could be engineered, that power could be planned, and that destiny could be constructed through discipline, money, and relentless ambition. This is why the Kennedy rise continues to fascinate audiences today, inspiring books, documentaries, and new screen adaptations, because it speaks to something deeply American, the idea that one generation can change everything, that barriers could be broken, that a single individual's vision can ripple through history, shaping events long after they are gone. And now, as this story reaches new audiences through modern media, it invites you not just to observe, but to reflect on the nature of power, ambition, and legacy, to question how much of success is earned, how much is engineered, and what the true cost of greatness really is. Because the Kennedy story is not just history, it is a mirror held up to society itself. If you want to understand how power is built, how influence is multiplied, and how legacy is crafted long before history records it, then you must engage with this story deeply, share it widely, and keep questioning the forces that shape the leaders we celebrate. So don't just listen and move on, take action now. Follow this narrative, explore the deeper truths behind famous names, subscribe, share, comment, and stay connected, because stories like this don't just explain the past, they equip you to understand the present and influence the future. And the next great rise in American society may already be unfolding right now, waiting for those who are paying attention.